Hi, friends. My name is Michael, the CEO of Truth Cartel. We're a marketing agency mostly focused on emerging tech, and we do have some true experts with us. I'll do just the briefest of intros and allow them to talk a little bit more about themselves and what they're interested in. But with me, we have Alex Botlin. He's the CEO of Trustology. We have Serg, who is the head of developer relations at Block One. We have Cynthia, who's the CEO of Altcoin Fantasy. And we're going to tell you how the world's going to look in 2040. No pressure, right? If you guys want to say a little bit more about yourselves, just to give the folks here a chance to get a sense of what you guys are working on, what authority you'll be speaking from, take us away.
Sure, I'll probably start. So my name is Serge. I'm looking after the developer relations at Block One. Block One is the publisher of the blockchain software. We build one of the most popular blockchain softwares out there called EOS.io, and that's been used to launch the pretty popular EOS public network and a few other blockchains out there. My role in the team is to raise the awareness around the technology in the community, as well as bring new developers in the ecosystem, and also to help the new companies that are starting on EOS.io to build their software as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Alex Botlin, founder and CEO of Trustology. Trustology is a custodial wallet provider for crypto assets. So if you don't want to lose your Bitcoin or Ether or ERC20 tokens, but you want a very easy way to interact them, whether you're a business or an individual, then please check out Trustology.io. Prior to starting up Trustology, I was running BNY Mellon's innovation function, so looking at how blockchain may impact existing custodial custody services, and prior to that, ran innovation for UBS, looking at blockchain, machine learning, and any other trend that you can imagine around tech.
Sure.
Don't forget AI.
Of course.
Hi, I'm Cynthia. I'm CEO and co-founder of Altcoin Fantasy. So what we focus on is really onboarding people who are new to the crypto space through education and hands-on practice that's risk-free in our simulator. So a lot of people come to crypto right now through trading. That's their first step into crypto. But as we saw in 2017 and 2018, it's a really scary space if you don't know what you're doing, and you can potentially lose a lot of money. So to get to mainstream adoption, we obviously have to focus a lot on education and onboarding people into an accessible way. So that's really what we focus on is, we are very much a support for the ecosystem. So we work really closely with projects like these guys to make sure that users know what these projects are working on and to be able to start using them.
Mm-hmm. And so when you really tune into this, you'll notice that on the panel we have folks who are concerned about security, folks who are actually building underlying technology, and then those who are educating us. And so we do have a real wide gamut of people to actually speak to what the future might look like. And to really get us started, I want to start with where we are now, right? London and the European sort of hub for finance. We're all from around the world. We're all traveling from North America or Southeast Asia or what have you. But I think a lot of finance ultimately runs through here. And so as a place to start, I think it'd be interesting for us to get a sense of what your take is on the local ecosystem these days for fintech, blockchain, and some of these other emerging technologies. Where's London on the map in terms of how fintech should be concerned? Take it away, anyone?
I'll probably start. Well, everyone kind of knows that London is the Fintech Hub. So there's a lot of the mix of the different ideas and different types of talent from all around the world, as well as some level of the regulatory interest and hopefully some support in the future. Yeah, definitely we see a lot of interest from the general community in the blockchain technology, as well as from the developers' interest as well. We run a number of different initiatives to support this interest, and hopefully in the future, it's not just going to be the fintech, but also the specifically blockchain hub in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of folks are competing for that one, to be sure. You're not in a small company. But guys, have you any other things to add about London specifically?
I mean, London is geographically advantageous. It's kind of halfway between Asia and US, so it always helps. It's a good hub. We have the right skills in London, which is really important. We have the heritage and trust, which is, again, very important. The one thing that I have seen a bit of a defocus is away from fintech, from government. Certainly during Cameron years, there was a huge amount of focus on fintech. I was there a number of times at 10 Downing Street trying to explain how that works. We've been distracted in the last couple of years from that mission, which is a real shame. I'm hoping that we can rediscover that commitment from the government to push forward on the fintech agenda, because I think it requires the cooperation of the government and the industry to really drive it forward and take the opportunities what may come after Brexit. Whichever way it rolls out, we will need to seize those opportunities, and we will need the support of the government and industry to work together to make it work.
Yeah, and I think, with blockchain especially, because regulation is so key to adoption and the advancement of blockchain technology, whichever country decides on some kind of regulatory environment, that's really the one that's going to win.
Sure, and I think that's a great way to segue into some of the stakeholders that are creating the future finance, right? We have the corporations, we have the innovation hubs within the corporations, we have startups, we have governments, and let's take a moment to talk about governments, because governments have an outsized impact on the environment in which the companies we build actually operate. We have a fairly rigorous regulatory body here in Europe and specifically in London, and then we even have the US trying to I think maybe even stifle some of the innovation happening in blockchain. You get China, and they may have left things a little bit too open in blockchain. And I wonder, blockchain or fintech specific, where do you think the role of the European governments is in terms of creating a good place to build a fintech business? Is it helping or impeding progress as it currently stands? Why don't we start there? Feel free to debate among each other if you have different opinions there too.
I'm pro regulations in general. I think regulations are guiding the businesses to not to deviate into some troubles, and also not to let their customers to get in troubles as well. Obviously, at the same time, this is a very in blockchain case. It's a very deeply technical topic as well. Governments need education, and the governments need to work together with the companies. And I feel like listening to many of the representatives of the governments, they are actually quite keen to listen as well. So I think it's a great opportunity for the businesses to actually engage with the representatives of the governments and let be heard, and also channel the whole industry in the right direction. Because I feel like governments get a lot of Chinese whispers about what blockchain is, and and associate it with all the bad things quite often. And it's our duty to actually educate them on the better side so that the industry moves in the right direction.
I think in the EU, I think something that's interesting is that in Ireland, they're actually doing a lot on the blockchain and regulation space. So there's actually a lot of companies in the blockchain and fintech space that are, starting corporations in Ireland. And it's interesting because if you think about the announcement of Libra, it's almost like forcing people's hands, right? Yeah. So these governments all around the world are having these discussions about what do we do about it, and some of these governments have already come out with decisions about how they think they're going to handle it. But I think it's interesting that a company that is a social media company can force these discussions, because that's the power that they have today.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. And it's going to be a really interesting, show to see also, how the governments actually that are quite often blamed at the moment, what role they're gonna play in the future, where the corporations are coming into play as well. So exciting.
Yeah,
I think in UK we have an advantage that we are a principles-based regulator, which is really important because it means that we can be adaptive no matter what the technology is. So that's a real advantage. And actually, we've seen with the FCA sandbox, there's a lot of movement towards providing action letters and so on, which I think is really important as well. But one of the things I would like to see the government push forward on is, we still have regulation that's very nationalistic, and it makes sense you want to compete on regulation as a jurisdiction, but at the same time, most of the businesses we're seeing, especially in the digital space, is all about globalization. So I would like UK government to take a lead on it becoming the global standard setter for regulation, both making sure that there is no tax avoidance, which I think is really, really important, and UK's pioneered that movement for transparency, and actually it's very compatible with blockchain, but at the same time, allowing businesses to prosper globally and creating the right framework to make sure that we don't look at regulation in one particular jurisdiction, but take a global view of regulation. So sure that UK government can take a leading role in that.
I think so too. I want to take a moment to welcome Susan. In her defense, we started about 20 minutes early, so I think you're right on time. She's the co-founder of Mucker AI, which identifies and removes fake information from across the web. And to jump back into our topic, I want to play devil's advocate for a minute and talking about the regulatory environments of countries like China, Malta, and ones that are, I think, rather deferring towards openness. What can we learn about the ways that those countries have built regulatory environments that are rather free, open, and perhaps rather hands-off, and have thus become hubs for blockchain in one way or another? Is there anything that you guys could add to that?
Okay,
Yeah.
so, all right. So when you talk about the global
If you
economy,
mind
right?
using the
So
microphone.
if you talk about the global economy, what is it that you're talking about? And what is your on-ramp and on-ramp to it, right? So we had the Industrial Revolution at the turn of the century, which was called commodification, right? And then we had, the information, the World Wide Web, and the information economy. And then we went to a knowledge economy based on who you know and what you know, which is the social web. If we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, right, and globalization 2.0, what we're talking about is data and geopolitical digital products, which are inherently global. I even with GDPR, I would really challenge any of you to track where parts of that data and my training corpus and my models are coming from as it dips in and out of knowledge networks and through different APIs. Who does that belong to, and how do you value it? Is there a standardized valuation of it? No, there is not. And the thing is, this has been rolling along. Distributed computing systems have been around for 20 years. Everyone thinks it's all new and everything. No, it had precursors. Innovation doesn't happen just out of a drop of a hat or instantly or because of one person or one company. That's the lone hero myth. It's an evolving dialogue. And so they've had 20 years to look at the evolution of money and digital assets, and they still have yet to fail to come up with an adequate regulation. And so what's happening in places like China, why they're leading the race in AI, is because they've turned their entire country and cities into digital labs, right? It's just taking in information anytime that there's so much as a movement of a car, traffic, or cat. It's counting and it's taking that in. There's sensors, right, that may look like a lamppost or a tree, but it's actually gauging the acidity in air and water quality as it comes down from the rain, right? And it's just building and feeding machine learning algorithms in the background. So what that's to say is that unless you are already on top of it, and there are small, this is where small states are at the most advantage. Small states under the UN, as defined by 10 million population and under, they're nimble, they're hungry, they're not dealing with legacy systems and legacy mindsets and entrenched idea of what an asset is or what is weighted and what is value and what the transactional value of that exchange is. That frees you up for a lot of creation, and they're building super fast. I know of no less than 6 economies that are already building that are open and free. Malta is definitely one of them. Liechtenstein. Now, I may not agree with some of the metrics and practices. I definitely don't agree with actually most of China's business practices, and I don't agree with their treatment of AI. And there are places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi that there are labs all around the world that have been focusing on the philosophy of what these technologies mean and how they plug into larger systems for the past 20 years, right? And so it's a scrum.
Yeah, let's
And I would actually tend to agree with this labs label. I think it's a great way to approach it, as long as it's not a, financial haven for, all sorts of not very good projects that actually spoil the whole, attitude to the country and to the financial industry
I
itself.
totally get it. I mean, last night I was joking about it. I said I didn't think that I could possibly find an industry that had a worse hit rate than Silicon Valley, and I found it in crypto. 99% of these coins are bullshit, and they don't really have. They're either like seriously, they're like souped up video games, or they're just something that someone made up and thought, oh, this is a good idea. It's like a Tamagotchi, but I'll put a crypto to the end of it. It's stupid. Old school business metrics apply. There are 3 pillars to a workable product, right? What is the singular promise of what you're building, right? What is the singular promise of that tech, and why are you using it? If you're saying it's blockchain because of data or provenance and all, I think that's bullshit. You should look at it because it's transparency, it's time-stamped, and it doesn't have a single point of failure. That is all we can count on for now that is scalable, right? Everything else, just someone is selling you something.
So let's actually dive further into that. Let's talk
Can I
technology.
just, one point on
Go ahead.
this one. It's very nice to talk about the micro regions, but there's a lot of burn up and re-entry, because what works in a small jurisdiction absolutely doesn't scale out. So I think we need to be a little bit careful with celebrating kind of the micro jurisdictions, because whilst they help to proof of concept stuff, we do need to realize that somebody like UK cannot take the same risks as Malta does because the consequence.
I'm not
is frankly
advocating
then-
it. I'm just
yeah.
saying it's kicking your ass.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are certainly interesting ways that you can hybridize this model, especially economic regions are probably one of the finest ways of doing that. China's a very, very big place, but they're not applying the same regulations across the entire nation. Now, the 90% or so of the landmass of China has become special economic regions because those are working so well. So I think there's something to be learned there from Singapore as well. Let's talk specifically about technology, because I think this is a lovingly contentious topic. We have some startups leading the way. We have some on this panel. And I want to actually talk about whether or not this technology is in installation phase, are we in actual application phase? Where is the technology of blockchain or AI in actually being useful to people at large, to people in this audience? If you guys want to take a swing at it, take it away.
So I think right now there's a lot of focus on like blockchain solving problems, but if we want to get to mainstream adoption, people don't really care about blockchain technology. They just want to care, if I am going to download an app, does it solve my problem? Is it better than the current experience? And we focus so much on, oh, blockchain this, blockchain that, but it's like no one's going to use a social media on blockchain if it's not better than the current solution. So it's less focusing on blockchain and like how do we actually create these new generation of apps that are actually better and give you some other incentive or some other benefit that doesn't exist today. So we need to shift away from blockchain first and put that more as like blockchain second and usability first.
Well, that only works, of course, for consumer. B2B with critical infrastructure, actually the properties of resiliency that blockchain does provide are really, really important, because when you're looking at a £10 payment, you don't give a damn. When it's a £1 billion payment, you do give a damn. So when I used to work for UBS, for instance, we worried about kind of guaranteeing that certain transactions happen in Switzerland. And you're like, yeah, it's easy. GPS on my phone guarantees location. Well, GPS signal is not signed. And for about $100,000, I can buy a van that blocks the GPS signals and basically fakes it. Now you say, who would on earth do 100 grand worth of spoofing? Well, actually, when the transaction is 2 billion, yeah, you're going to invest in that. So I think for me, the exciting thing about blockchain is the infrastructure resiliency and not being dependent on a single entity that is potentially able to kick you off rather than necessarily the usability. That, of course, has to have utility for the infrastructure, but for me, the exciting bit is the resiliency.
I probably tend to agree with both sides. So on one side, it's a problem. On the other side, it's a technology, and that's the match that actually creates great business. You know, we at Block One adopt this way of thinking, and we also very focused on the user experience and on the, you know, the whole idea that blockchain is the technology that the end user should not necessarily be directly exposed to. You can check out our, we just recently announced the project called Voice.com, which is our social media network that we just recently announced. And it does use some of the aspects of the blockchain technology to solve some of the existing problems of the social media networks, for sure. But we are not telling in your face that it's all about blockchain. It's about solving the problem itself.
Yeah, let's dive a little bit into that. I want to actually take a moment to talk about voice specifically, because we do have an interesting case study of Libra, which is basically launching a token on top of a social network. Here's an interesting example of a token launching a social network. I want to understand better, and I would love to have you share with everybody, what is the utility that blockchain actually applies for the voice platform?
So I don't even think that you should call it blockchain anymore, because at the end of the day, it's a novel data structure. And it's a distributed computing system with a delegated novel data structure. So the only things that have been able to work and scale, especially in terms of AI, are DAGs, right? When you have parallel computing. And that's why people are so hot on quantum computing methods or theorems, except for they're using optical computing, which allows for horizontal and vertical computing at the same time, but without having to use qubits, which is using really unstable middleware, hardware, and software issues, right? You asked a question before about where AI and blockchain seamlessly seem to have a synergy together. And I don't want to delve too much on I think it's completely wrong and short-sighted to identify Facebook as a social media company. You're out of your mind. It is a data behemoth. It's a superpower in a data-driven economy. And they're the ones that are responsible for collapsing the separation of church and state. But there used to be a division of editorial and advertorial and advertising, and now it's all kind of smushed together because of the corrupt ad revenue model. So don't ever make a mistake. In the globalization 2.0 in a data-driven economy, you're looking at the Death Star, right? Like these are all data plays. Google, Facebook, all these Uber. You think it's a service? It's not. These are all data plays, right? They're selling data. That's how they make their money. Right? So second. So about 3 years ago, in trying to build my own training corpus for my AI company, I thought, the world needs another data scraper, like it needs a hole in the head. So I started, programming classifiers myself, looking them up from neurolinguistic programming and stylography tactics to look at core content, right? And classifiers are simply binary questions that help you organize the data in a way that you can talk to your computer and teach it. Right?
Yeah, let's lean this really into the actual utility for the end user. We can talk about the technology, but let's actually focus on utility.
Well, I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah.
So if you look at AI as simply as a long line of evolution that started with steam and went to electricity, then that's how you have to look at AI and machine learning. It is pattern recognition and automation of thousands of sets of data and 100,000 sets of work and details that human beings were never meant to do. Right? And if you look at blockchain, all it does is it gives you a trustless system without a single point of failure that not one entity owns and controls. And so when it came to building my own training corpus, I looked at the way that I can crowdsource the data to look at the person-to-machine transactions as well as the machine-to-machine transactions of where the data dips out and what activation layers work. And so this is a huge benefit to anyone who's building a complex distributed computing system, such as the back end of governments, of large enterprises, as well as imagine any back end systems and payments and remittances systems, right?
Good.
So the point that I get excited about blockchain actually is it's lowering the cost of trust. If you look at it at a slightly abstract level, we talked about resilient networks, but resiliency is really important because coupled with programmability, the smart contracts, you add the two together and the cost of trust plummets. And now what I call it the long tail of trust, because today what we can start doing is offering trust services and enabling trade that can't exist today, because today we have mass-produced trust at a particular price point, which means anything that's slightly quirky doesn't get done. By reducing the cost of trust to pennies versus probably thousands, we can now start creating new businesses on the back of new accelerated, much cheaper trust. So, so this is why I know we're talking at generalizations at this point, but we have seen time and time again, when in economics we can significantly shift the price point of certain service, in this case the service of trust. Right. We transform, just like Amazon transformed book selling from mass-produced to mass-customized. We'll see the same shift towards trust. We'll have much more granular trust at a much cheaper price point for a lot more stuff than we had before. It takes time to get there. Machine learning sits on top, because blockchain is the guarantor of execution. It is fully deterministic. It is one of the most deterministic systems in the world, and it will constrain the decision-making, the fuzzy decision-making that AI will perform. So the two are in combination. The blockchain is the guardian, and AI is the the thinking part of that.
Yeah, you have technology in the brain.
All of those distributed systems will need machine learning embedded into those blocks to make sense of the transactions of the data.
Yeah. Let's take the last few minutes that we have here to pick one, either technology, outcome, consumer behavior, what have you. Let's take that all the way out to 2040. Consumer behaviors will change, the underlying technology will change, but I'm curious, if you take one idea to the logical extreme, how do you think the economy will look then? How will we engage with the economy? Let's start at the other end. Lovely. Let's do that. Great. Yeah, you guys can go right on Slido, throw your questions up there. Otherwise, we'll start calling people if your hands are up. Let's give a strong finish with this question, and then we'll transition to the Q&A side of things.
Sure. So I think one thing I don't agree with, Susan, you were talking about data. I think the whole evolution of blockchain technology and the philosophy behind it is moving away from the power of data, right, and giving that back to people. So all of these companies that own data, like Facebook and Google, and the place that they're going for, are going to basically be abolished with mainstream adoption of blockchain technology, because these companies will not own data anymore. It'll be distributed back to the power of individuals. So
I think you're living in fantasy.
I think that that's something we touched briefly before this panel in regards to DAX and decentralized autonomous corporations. And I think that today decentralized autonomous corporations is a bit of a ludicrous fantasy. But with the powers of AI, for example, we well may be seeing much more of the working DAX in the future, and that's where the data will still play a big role, but it's not going to be used in the advertisement models and the freemium models as we see today. It's going to be an evolution of how business is done.
Yeah.
I mean, 2040, it is, given the current trajectory, things will probably change and never evolve this way. We'll see mass conventional unemployment because between AI, taking white-collar jobs and the blue-collar jobs with robotics, we will see mass extinction of conventional jobs. It doesn't mean new jobs will not come along, but we have to, as a society, start shifting our perspective about what the value system is, because we're still a very Protestant society that work is good and if you're unemployed, you're rubbish. The reality is we may be seeing 80% unemployment rate as the new norm by 2040. We should make people feel bad about it, and we should create new channels for people to be creative. At the same time, we need to channel ever dwindling resources in the most efficient usage, for which point AI would be the only solution to do that at scale. So we need to combine social movement to understand what our new value system is based in the new context, coupled with technology innovation that will become a necessity and no longer just something we should do, because we will die out if AI isn't controlling our resource allocation.
I would be really interested to see how in that world of mass unemployment, the whole idea of UBI actually plays out, and if there is a place for it and some form for it.
Yeah. Let's look at my
Not UVI, but so we were actually discussing this from like 3 years ago at Davos. It was really predominant about like what we can do in terms of bringing the technology on board with the right philosophy, so that things like compassion and equality, equity, and transparency is built into the mission-critical processes, right? Because there's about 9 to 12 value points and stages that you need to hit before you can launch anything, right? You get the corporate formation, you get the system design, the token design, right? And then you go through compliance and political economic sort of behavior for the retention mechanics. And it goes all the way down the line, right, to really refine it and iterate it. We talked about, instead of universal earned income, because think about, so all the automation, right, 80% of all the processes now that we pay people to do, of jobs that people were never really meant to do, if you think about it, at a velocity that people are not meant to do. The office, the ubiquitous office, is a failed social experiment, right, of the 20th century. Then we'll have all this productivity. So why can't we then have earned basic income? Right? It doesn't mean that we have to refigure like what work is, right? I always, whenever I bring new women on board to crypto, I ask them, what is it that you love to do that you can do standing on the head faster than anybody else? And then go find somebody who needs that doing. And maybe you can take half in crypto and half in fiat, right? Sure. And just earn it so that you're mitigating your risk. And so let's look at what with all this automation, I am predicting that the value of things that cannot scale, right? Because I know that whether you are a mother who looks after, a teacher that looks after a child, or socializes an abused dog, or trains them to smell explosives, things that require human or animalistic touch and caring.
Traditionally, those are critical thinking, empathic relating, and critical problem
and caregiving and modeling human consideration, what really causes us to be humane, will go up in value. Like that one-on-one service, I'm already seeing it. Why do you think people sit in first class? It's so that you can get waited on hand and foot. You don't have to wait in line for anything, right? So like there's this cachet in what we value is going to be offset by what cannot be scaled and automated. And then with all this productivity, hopefully we'll have a universal earned income. You take these quizzes, that you choose to be educated, that you go find a craft or a smithing gig that that robots can't do well, and we will pay you. We'll pay you to help grow our society and our cities.
Yeah, and when you actually have AI, you're going to need to train the damn thing. So there's going to be a whole suite of jobs, well said, that will need to happen in order to actually generate useful AI. And one of the things that I believe we'll have to learn is how to empathize, how to create, And these are only things that humans can teach it by doing those things. Whether or not those are the things that we actually earn for, at the very least, there will be some element of teaching something else, some of the things that are
Honestly, I
essentially
think
humans.
bots have a higher rate and have a much more consistent rate of evolution than human beings have shown.
Yeah, necessarily,
I'm
because
just
we
playing
have the
devil's advocate here.
constraints of body
So-
and so on, right?
No. So there's like, GAN's. Oh, by the way, so if you talk to Dr. Harry Clore, and he like consults with James Cameron and all this shit, and he's a double PhD in computational biology and AI, machine learning, and neural networks. He's actually building Avatar, and he started building it about 2 years ago. There's different sort of robotics and haptic feedback that are learning human beings on showing people how to get into better flow states, on teaching people how to be more humane. And so that's where I see the role of AI. These are tools, just like anything else.
Let's have some questions from the floor. You guys are making these amazing predictions. Look, one big hand up here. Let's
do
hear
that.
some questions before you go.
Please, go ahead.
Thank
Are you stretching or are you asking questions?
Microphone over here.
let's do the other
guy
hand
in
too,
cool
so you should even out.
sunglasses.
Yeah, a little while ago we were, forgive me because I'm very stupid and very practical. A little while ago we were talking about how things will change for the better, and we were making a comparison. We were about to make a comparison between Facebook and voice, and then we got sidetracked. I would like to bring us back to that point and see how one will be better than the other in terms of data, selling, stealing, and coins and all of that.
Start us off.
Well, I definitely will not go deep into voice because a lot of it is still under the wraps. But one of the things that we were talking about is it's tip of the iceberg in the whole problem of the social media networks at the moment is the identity, real identity, fake identity. And blockchain can help. Exactly. Blockchain can help quite a lot in solving the strong identity issues. But again, we just announced the project. There are a lot still things that are under the wraps. So you can check out voice.com and stay tuned.
Okay, any more questions from the floor?
One of the questions I actually saw on the Slido was whether or not Facebook will exist in 2040. And I actually want to give Cynthia the chance to respond back about what that will look like, whether it'll stay around, whether it'll evolve. If you have any thoughts on how that might happen between now and then, love to hear it.
Probably not, because if you look at history, like, the Forbes 50 list, the companies in the last 10 years, 40% of them are different. And so things change so quickly, and Facebook is obviously facing a lot of regulatory issues and just a lot of trust issues. And I think the movement to blockchain is this move away from these big companies that own data, because people are sick of it. If you look at Brave as a really good example of people who want to take back that identity, they want to take back their data, they want to monetize off of it. That's really where the evolution is going. And there's a really good book on this called Life After Google, and this really talks a lot about this topic, about how these companies, in the last 10, 20 years, it's really been about big data. But we're moving very far away from that, because that's really the past. And moving forward, we're going to look at companies that give users power back, whether that's identity, whether that's money through being served ads or selling off information. It's really going back to the user.
Sure. Do you want to respond? With the mic.
If that was the case, then I wouldn't see contracts signed for $192 million, right? Looking at different point of sale systems and remittances, payment systems, and data exchanges that are creating a universal standard that's tradable for data sets and models. You wouldn't have Singularity Net that raised $40 million, that's now close to $80 million, that is building just this thing of AI models and data sets and data plays. And you wouldn't see people like First Data, that's a $71 billion company, also investing and partnering with yet another commercial play that's going to be traded on NASDAQ for standardized data. And so for industrial uses, I'm not saying that it's not aggregated and anonymized, right? But all the rails of this have been building in stealth for the last 5 to 7 years and are ready to go. And they're taking in mass amounts of investments. I am telling you this because I think you should be very much aware of it. Now, I've always been an advocate of distributed computing systems and peer-to-peer and crypto as a measure of exchange. Most people don't know this, but even though 99% of those tokens are bullshit, they're the ones that are really credible, like Bitcoin, have a source code and it represents simply the most efficient transfer of technology and data for technologists, that if we can trade tokens and I can look at your source code and plug it into what I'm working on and be able to use the feature and use your networks and incentivize it, like linking it together like connective tissue, like all of the best tech should be working together to build out robust systems, right, and ecosystems. And so, so yes and no, mass adoption is coming. Does anybody, how many people here work for a company that says they have a data strategy, right? No, you don't know what to do with it. All of it's in silos, it's inconsistent, it's messy. Trillions of dollars of assets are on spreadsheets, and that's just the company stuff. Like, look at your own stuff, right? Like, where do you have, where on your cloud servers do you have your pictures and your documents, right? Passport scans, right?
Yeah,
Does-
there is
do you guys
demand
have
for generalizable
yeah.
data that you admitted yourself, right?
Sure.
And you have to admit
but it
that.
costs more, but it's more valuable, and we're talking 0.001 cents. if you
Sure,
look
sure.
at it
But
when
if
it's tradable.
the point here is, I think Facebook will not be the sole proprietor of the siloed data. The data will move on because people will actually value the data enough to be paid for it. Data is easily scraped and gathered and resold. That's basically
Sure.
what Singularity is
That's
trying to
yeah,
do.
That's the
And
that's
so you'd
the
imagine
global.
it's not the single one player.
That is the global. That's exactly
Yeah.
it. There are competing plays of it,
Mhm.
and no one has the connective tissue or the infrastructure to come up with a universal value unit to be able to trade it.
But-
We're not
but-
even there yet. You're talking. The world that you're talking
hear it.
about is at least 20, 30 years away.
Well, we
So
are
just-
talking
So
2040,
just,
though.
we're nearly out of time, but I want you guys to tell me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what excites you most about the opportunities in digital and technology? So Cynthia, we'll start with you and we'll come back this way. And then we'll move on to the next panel. But thanks very much. It was getting a bit hot, so we're going to end on a high
That's
note.
the point. Love it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really awesome about being in fintech and especially blockchain and crypto is I always use this example of Jobs, Steve Jobs, him talking about growing up in the 70s and having access to all these really great minds and being in Silicon Valley, so right time, right place, and he could call up the CEO of HP and say, hey, you know, send me this part. And I think we're living very much in that time where if you work in crypto and blockchain, you have access to the greatest minds in the space right now. You could call up the CEO of Block One and say, hey, like, you know, I have this idea, I want to run it by you, I have this D app, I want to work with you. And I think that's something that's really special that doesn't come along very often. So for anyone who's working in the space, it's a really great time to be able to shape that and form part of the future.
Okay, how about you?
I think the ability to create new wealth opportunities for everyone through lower cost of trust, I think is going to be groundbreaking and is going to really reshape the way we look at finance in this new world. So I very much look forward to seeing what happens.
Serge.
I'm really looking forward to fixing internet. Internet as it's today is totally broken, just from the financial models perspective and the business models perspective. And I'm looking forward for technologies like AI and blockchain and all the others that come in the next 20, 30 years to actually unscrew the situation, bring better alignment between the stakeholders on internet, bring better transparency, and remove all the crazy things that were happening over the last couple of years.
How about we go to Susan and Michael, you can close the panel.
Yeah, I'll take us away at the last 10 minutes there.
I love it how all the different cities around the world are turning into giant sandboxes, and that instead of like downloading a stupid app, that I can basically choose to enter into a co-agreement and co-creation agreement between all levels of government and between different cities and even peer-to-peer around the world. Can you imagine what would happen if the entire world turned into a task-focused mechanical Turk, so that we have a system that looks like a video game, but it's saying, how do I restore plastic from the oceans and be able to pay with crypto, you know, some of the world's, you know, greatest minds, and to say, help me fix this, right? And I'll reward you for it. And if we use it even more, that all that value doesn't get extracted to the Cayman Islands or goes to sit on your server, but it goes right back into the system to drive down the cost using economies of scale. So that's what I'm the most excited about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael.
Yeah, I'll finish off, and I actually tremendously agree with that. The biggest application for blockchain, in my mind, is really just an incentive layer, an economic layer for the philosophies we want to live by. It's a way of underpinning the things that we want to value in our society with the incentives to actually get them out there, get them done. It gives people who may not have meaning or a way of earning to do things that are not just valuable for their ways of earning and making money and getting food on the table and supporting their children, but also to have those things be aligned with the philosophies that we want to see in the world, whether that is cleaning the oceans, or it's training AI, or it's being active in government. So the philosophical underpinning that we've been missing is an economic layer to that, and blockchain could be that. So that's what I'm excited about.
Thanks so much. Let's give a big hand to that panel.